你应该面对着法律制裁。他知道他会死了嘛，但是我们告诉他说，你现在虽然会被枪毙，会判死刑，但是你这个动作就是在帮忙你太太，在帮忙你的儿子。那这些是他现在能做的嘛？因为我这个他就没有办法做什么事情嘛。他告诉他说，你还有办法做这个事情，那这个东西可以说服他了。
陈进兴可以说，至少他心头感觉他想要交代的一些事情，就是他太太的问题他交代了。
陈进兴就说，那既然谢律师就是我已经进来了，那他可以出去投降。他讲这一句的时候，因为可能大家都期待这一句话很久了，所以陈太太就哭出来。
1997年11月19号晚间的7点50分，陈进兴终于把最后一名人质安然释放，最后一把手枪交给侯友宜，同时伸出了双手，让侯友宜为他铐上手铐。
As Anne came out of the house, she looked out at the people outside and she just smiled. She had this broad smile on her face. And I just shot, there's Anne, there's Anne. And the tears were just running down my face. I just couldn't believe that she was okay, she's safe. And then I felt relief. That was the first time when the tension just left me. It just sort of drained out of me. And I fell back on the bed and I felt it's over now. Now it's over. Now we're all okay.
我们就是好像一个石头放下来一样，然后终于解决了。但是我也觉得有一个责任替他太太辩护，我也答应了当然我也知道这个社会是有很多不同意见的，认为他是恶魔而且他太太也被认为是共犯嘛。我是陈进兴恶魔的一个律师，因为他在社会上其实大家都认为他太太是坏人，但是我们律师的责任就是他避免他受到他不应该有的偏见的制裁。
如果我们事后回头去看这整个人质谈判的一个过程台湾的警方应该是属于非常生嫩的阶段，这些媒体纯粹只是想要赚广告跟收视率。这整个陈进兴老师一个重头戏，他先进入那个武官家里，那控制了每个人之后，他几乎是剧本是照他心里想的要什么都有。我应该可以视为说，台湾的警界借这个案子在累积谈判经验。
The smell is really strong, so it will always affect our sleep really bad until I got migraine.
There's a Samsung phone. I'll try to plug it down.
Population of Singapore will continue to age. The numbers of older persons living alone is also increasing. So I can predict that the numbers of such deaths might go up.
Once it is a police case, usually you expected it will be dragged for a while. the body start to decompose. So any touches on him, we will damage actually his skin.
We work with patients who are at risk of dying alone. We want to support for them.
Dead Alone in Singapore, a new 3-part series starting on 12th of June.
This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Italy hosts a high-stakes G7 meeting where leaders are tackling critical issues, including China's alleged industrial overcapacity and unfair trade practices. New Zealand and China acknowledged their differences but pledged to boost economic ties as Premier Li Qiang wraps up day one of his visit to the Pacific nation. And China threatens to file a suit with the World Trade Organization over planned EU tariffs on imports of Chinese EVs, describing the move as blatant protectionism. And a South Korean newspaper reports that Japanese and North Korean officials met in secret in Mongolia last month, a rare occurrence given the lack of formal diplomatic relations. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, our special series on Bhutan continues. We'll explore if the tiny kingdom can maintain its big reputation as the world's first carbon-negative country. Also ahead, we'll examine how China plans to focus on boosting economic activity at home to achieve its annual growth target, with the latest episode of CNA's Insight. Leaders of the group of 7 countries are in Italy for their annual summit, with much to discuss over the next 3 days in the picturesque region of Puglia. With the conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza set to top the agenda, along with the rise of artificial intelligence, economic security, as well as ways to push back against what they call China's unfair trade practices. Well, the White House says that the group's leaders are more unified than ever on major issues, including allegations that China is flooding global markets with cheap products due to overcapacity at its factories. Well, the US and the European Union's ongoing trade feud with Beijing reached another flashpoint this week. On the eve of the summit, Washington announced new restrictions on Chinese firms selling semiconductors to Moscow as it expanded its list of sanctions to undercut Russia's war on Ukraine. Well, the European Commission announced new tariffs, threatening to impose them on imports of Chinese electric vehicles from July. The G7 leaders are expected to highlight their concerns surrounding high Chinese production levels, which they say are disrupting global supply chains and market stability. But amid all that tough talk on clamping down on Beijing, EU diplomats have warned that Europe is anxious to avoid a full-blown trade war. And Giles Gibson, he joins us live now from the beautiful and picturesque Bari, Italy. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Giles. So tell us what exactly we can expect from discussions on what some G nations have called China's overcapacity.
Well, we're getting reports that the US team are really pushing hard for there to be a united front presented by the G7 countries when it comes to responding to what they describe as Chinese overcapacity, this idea that cheap Chinese imports are having a dramatic effect on some of the economies in the West, of course, that are represented within the G7. But it looks unlikely that we're going to get any sort of coordinated trade action or sanctions off the back of this summit. And that's partly because the members of the G7 have quite different policies when it comes to pushing back against Chinese overcapacity, as they describe it. So, as you were outlining there, the US have recently brought in some significant tariffs on things like Chinese electric vehicles. We also have the European Commission in Brussels moving forward with provisional tariffs from next month on Chinese electric vehicles. But within the EU and actually within the G7, you do have countries like Germany, for example, that are much, much more cautious about responding to China in this way, and then potentially all of this escalating into a trade war between China and the European Union and the US, or sort of all three at the same time. So I think by the end of this summit, we could see some strong language from the G7 about Chinese overcapacity, but perhaps not any actual coordinated action.
So aside from those issues out of China, I believe Ukraine and Gaza crises will be featuring heavily on the agenda. What further developments can we expect from discussions?